gear. Let me start off by introducing a woman who works with the NBA, the NHL, tennis, and the U.S. Open. She's a sports photographer out of the East Coast, Jen Pottheiser. Welcome her to the stage.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome. This next gentleman is the coolest cat when it comes to shoes, and I want you to notice those when he comes up. He has worked for Sports Illustrated, ESPN Magazine. He's shot multiple World Series, Super Bowls, you name it. He's been at the sports event. He's probably one of the most creative sports photographers out there using technologies within the cameras. You'll see some of those pictures behind us today. Andrew Hancock, Nikon ambassador.
What's up, brother?
Check these shoes out. Show those kicks. This next woman I met several years ago, and her work fascinated me right away because it's probably the type of thing I would never do. She's out on the ocean, on yachts, racing, in a very dangerous, difficult situation to shoot in. She's going to talk about her challenges today. Ladies and gentlemen, Jen Edney.
Thank you, Mike.
And then this next guy. I met a long time ago, and we are brothers, for sure. I've known him for well over a decade or so, maybe more. He is the team photographer from the Seattle Seahawks. I asked him to come in today and tell us about stuff you do on the field, but I want to know the stories behind the scenes of what happens, you know, inside the locker room and the types of photographs that he creates. He allowed me to try on his Super Bowl ring when Seattle won the Super Bowl many years ago and then blew it the following year by 1 yard. Ladies and gentlemen, Nikon ambassador Rod Marr. So, again, we want to have a nice discussion here. We know you're at CES. We got a lot of gearheads here talking about pixels and focal lengths and light transmission and active IAF and things like that. But I want to start, and we're going to start with you, Jen, and work our way in. Let's give the people here that may not know you a little background on who you are, where you come from, how you got started in photography, and don't hold anything back.
No holding back. Again, thanks for that intro. I'm Jen Pottheiser. I'm a commercial sports photographer on the East Coast, and I'm fortunate enough to travel around the world for some really great clients on some really great assignments. I went to Duke University, which is a hotbed of sports, and that's really where my love of sports photography began. And now just work really hard to create images for my clients, and as you mentioned before, incredibly fortunate that we get to do what people pay to do.
Mm-hmm. And just so you know, Jen is LeBron James's best friend, right? I mean, that's the way it works.
Besties.
Yeah.
Hashtag besties.
We'll talk about the close encounters that you guys have with athletes and how you handle that. But Andrew, talk to everybody a little bit about what you do, where you're from.
Born and raised in Texas, spent the last 15 years living in self-imposed exile in Indiana, and that's kind of where I got my start working newspapers. My degree is actually in written journalism, but I always kind of gravitated toward photography because I felt I was most adept at telling a story with a camera, and that was my favorite way to work. So I worked newspapers for a while, then spent some time, worked my way up, started working for Sports Illustrated, ESPN, Players Tribune, different colleges and pro teams, and just trying to live the dream.
Mm-hmm. Jen Edney, your story is pretty wild. Again, I don't think I could ever do what you do. Explain to everybody where you're from and how you got started in photography.
Well, I think the strangest thing about where I'm from is that I'm actually from Nebraska, which is probably the most landlocked place you could
Lots of water
be.
there, right?
Yeah, lots of water there. But I got into photography mainly because of my father. He's what introduced me to photography on a family trip when I was 15. That's when I first picked up a camera. I really didn't get into it, though, until right after college. I decided I wanted to be a photojournalist. So I went to California to have some more training, and there I was an intern at the Ventura County Star. And I'll tell more about this in my talk later, but as an intern there, one of my daily assignments was to photograph 16-year-old Zach Sunderland, and at the time he was preparing to be the youngest kid or person to solo circumnavigate the world. And I ended up independently covering that story for the next year, which is kind of how I got into sailing. Needing to get to places to meet up with him, I ended up learning how to sail. And that's just kind of how it rolled into me being on the water full time. And the most unique thing about that is I was afraid of the ocean. I can say
and you picked the place that's perfect for you then.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. We were talking last night. You said you were on the road for basically about 10 years, and you finally got a break. And we're going to talk about how the commitment that you make to this, because there's no turning back when you're out on the water.
No.
Right? Rodmar, my brother.
What's going on?
Let's talk to these people about where you got started in photography and how do you end up becoming the Seattle Seahawks photographer?
Well, I originally wanted to be an astronaut, but I suck at math and I suck at science.
I see that didn't work out, yeah.
So that didn't work out. And then I wanted to be the first Asian American basketball player in the NBA.
Oh, that's a great one. In the short league? Or?
I can't shoot, I can't dribble, I can't pass, and I'm not tall.
Yeah, I noticed. I think they noticed too.
Yeah, went into photojournalism, like a couple of these guys did, and that journey took me, with my love of sports, into photography. Worked at the Seattle Times for a number of years before embarking on a freelance career and taking on clients like an NFL football team.
So in Seattle, your beat was sports photography?
It was, yes. Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Yeah.
The one thing we'll talk about this, and you're seeing in the pictures behind us, that we will talk about sports in action and how you guys get to there, but sports photography goes well beyond that, doesn't it? I mean, relationships and portraits that you guys have to do. So the stories can, at times, be very commercial in the way of a portrait, and then you got to shift gears and go into sports photography. We'll talk about all those tips along the way as we go. So I brought up LeBron James because recently I saw a picture that you submitted to us, and it was a selfie with athletes. You come in contact with athletes, and I guess there are protocols you live by. I know on credentials, if you get a photo credential, it says you are not allowed to ask for autographs, and you will get thrown out if you do. This is a serious thing. But I want to address, like, how do you get that access? Because everybody here will sit there and say, oh, God, I wish I could be where you are. But you have to build up to get that access and credentials. Talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah, so much of what all of us do is built on trust. Trust from our clients, trust from our subjects. So I've probably shot LeBron James 250 times, and LeBron knows that I'm there to do my job.
Right.
Before we start a shoot, I'll say, hey, LeBron, this is what we need. We need 5 minutes. We need 3 hours. It really depends on the client and the project. And I'll say, you're going to do 3 outfit changes. Here's what is ahead of you. And I think he specifically, but athletes in general, always appreciate you treating them as a human. It's you talking to them, no handlers involved. So I have always gone by the rule that we're there to work. I'll be cordial and friendly and hug and kiss hello, but I don't want your autograph. I don't want your children. Let's just do what we need to do.
I think that's really important too, because you're trying to make a living at this, and I think when you don't break those boundaries of trust, they will ask you to come back again. Yet if you cross the line, like I know a lot of people love to throw pictures out there socially. If you shot this picture of LeBron, you throw it out there socially without permission, you can almost guarantee your job is done. You'll never get that gig again. Andrew, I know you got a lot of personal relationships, like with some of the players from the Houston Astros. I want to keep carrying the conversation on about the respect, but the relationships that you develop with the athletes.
Sure. And and like she said, I mean, it's a process, and it always doesn't happen overnight. And so you just have to conduct yourself professionally. Oftentimes, like if you have a portrait shoot, and if you say it's going to take like X number of time, if you're able to end that a little bit sooner and you're able to get them out on their way, know what you have for yourself and for your client, that always is a really big deal. But the main thing is just being respectful, being professional, and treating them just like a person, because everybody always puts these guys up on pedestals, and they're just normal people, and it's just being able to relate with them, visit with them, not alienate them, not go up as a fan and freaking out, because like you say, we have a job to do, and our #1 goal is to come away with the picture, and you just got to make sure that you have a good dialogue, develop a rapport with them, and then if you're fortunate enough to be able to work well with them and develop a relationship, and then doors can open up where you're able to do things behind the scenes, away from the field, and get some of that access. So.
I remember the first photo credential I ever got for a football game. Take us back to that first credential and assignment that you were ever given, and what's going on with you when you're thinking about getting to the stadium, preparing to go? Are you not sleeping the night before because it's your first gig? And when you walk out to that stadium for the first time, talk about that experience.
It's kind of a funny story because like the first time I ever shot at a football stadium was actually whenever I was a student at A&M, and didn't actually have a credential. We actually had a little bit of a counterfeit photo pass ring going on for the student paper.
Oh, that's good. We are not advocating anything illegal
now
on this
really hard to
show.
do,
I'm just saying.
But you know, part of that was just creating opportunities. But the first time I ever shot football was actually for the Dallas Cowboys training camp, and no student media had ever been allowed inside the training camp before. And so I go and I'm just like wide-eyed because I grew up watching the Dallas Cowboys. Sorry, Rod. And you know, it just was just my eyes were huge. And I'm just trying to watch the media work and just try to find my way. But I remember just the nerves then as you progress in your career, and the first time that Sports Illustrated assigned me to shoot a football game. And it's just, yeah, the night before I'm going through and I'm researching the stadium. I'm looking for different angles where I can put a remote camera, you know, where I need to shoot from, and just trying to make sure I've got everything in my mind right, knowing what the magazine is expecting from me based on the story that I have to tell them.
A lot of work and preparation.
It is, and so it's a lot of, you know, pre-production and planning and nerves that go on, because whenever you're shooting at a high level, like, you have to come back with the best stuff. And if you don't,
amazing.
that's just not acceptable, because if you don't, then your phone's not likely to ring.
For the next gig, right. You know, it's funny, the thing I remember, the first time I ever stepped out in the Meadowlands was the smell of the turf.
Yeah.
And I can't get that out of my, don't judge me here, it was the smell of the turf, but that stays with you forever.
Right.
Before I get to you, Jen, Rod, talk about your first credential experience and that first time you stepped out into the big stadium, whatever that was, baseball or football.
Wow, that was so long ago.
I was going to say.
Football was in black and white, and I'm not sure they had helmets. It was a long time ago. I remember the vastness of it and the bigness of it. The stadiums are huge, and I think it was probably a college football game, or maybe it was a pro football game in Seattle's Kingdome, which shows how old I am. The Kingdome hasn't existed for 15 years. But it's the vastness and the bigness. And I had a mentor, a guy named Harley Soltis. He told me, don't worry about the bigness, just worry about your job. Doesn't matter where you are.
Right.
What matters is take the picture. And that really helped me along my way.
Right. So, Jen, you're in a very specialized world, right? A little different than everybody else.
Yeah.
Talk about, I mean, where do you take that first step into going on a yacht? How do you get credentialed to do your first race? You know, is it a relationship? Did somebody see your photo? What is that journey all about?
It's relationships. You know, I think the first time I did the America's Cup World Series event, I was in Italy working on an editorial assignment with Yacht Magazine. And a friend of mine was in Italy working the America's Cup World Series event. I didn't know anything about that kind of sailing at the time, but he suggested I come over and invited me out there. So I ended up I asked the magazine, I was like, hey, can I go over there? It didn't cost me much because I was in the next town over. I had friends to stay with, so the opportunity was there, and I took it. I got lucky there because I was able to I connected with the person who was in charge of assigning the boats for the photographers.
Right.
And he ended up putting me on on boats that I didn't realize at the time. I ended up with some of the main team photographers. I knew who they were, but they didn't know who I was, and I was awestruck. I learned a lot from them, and that was probably the beginning of the building of the relationships and understanding how that worked in the industry for me.
Right. So I think a lot of people's impression too is, you know, sports photography, it's easy, right? You go out there and you shoot pictures. You got autofocus now. Andrew, with you, talk to me about how important it is. I know what's the number one rule in sports photography is understanding the sport. Talk to me about what you do to research, study, understand, and what I think the most number one rule of photography to be a good photographer in sports is anticipation.
Yeah, that, and then I think probably the second rule of that is to be a good problem solver. And I think a lot of that goes hand in hand. Being able to be prepared when you go to a venue. One of the images cycling through is a finish line shot from the Kentucky Derby. And, you know, in 141 years, that angle had never been captured before. And so it's, you know, doing your homework, being there early. I actually noticed kind of the potential of that position a year prior. And it wasn't, you know, an opportunity until they started putting in the night lights at Churchill Downs. And it had been in a few years, and then one day I was walking by and I was like, wait a second, I think I can put a camera up there. And then it's trying to research how to do it. But at that Kentucky Derby, I was already starting to work with the Churchill down staff to try to make that happen for the next year. And trying to always kind of have that idea, have the wheels in motion, be planning things, but then also if something does go wrong, which often happens with remote cameras, you know, something's not going to work, and then how are you able to troubleshoot something whenever you've got 20-something cameras set up all over the track, and they're only going to go by 1.5 times, and you've got to make the picture because they're not going to rerun the race for you. And so it's just, you know, again, prepare, and then you know, try to have, you know, the I's dotted and the T's crossed, and then after that, it's just, you know, trusting the camera and letting the action come to you and unfold, and just, you know, push the button.
Yeah, I remember I played baseball in high school and the early years of college, and to me it was just photographing baseball was so easy because I knew, you know, the first batter gets on base, what they're likely to be the fastest runner, which means where's your camera pointed? It's always one step ahead of the action.
Right.
But I also think, Jen, in the portrait work you do, whether it's the action shots you do at the U.S. Open or the portraits you do you do a little bit of research on the players?
You have to. You have to know who your subject is. You have to know the relationships. You have to know what happened the night before in the game. You have to do your homework. An example, this past U.S. Open, Serena Williams was the all-time favorite to win the women's singles championship. So I was planning on doing portraits after she won, and we had all of these backdrops set up, and it was all about Serena. Well, as many of you know, Serena did not win that, and you know, right before the match ends, I'm in the back saying, okay, we can't go with a golden background for Naomi Osaka, who is about to defeat Serena. We have to switch plans. So being fast on your feet, knowing what the story is.
Very cool. So Jen,
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about gear, because I think compared to the other panelists, your prime lenses are going to be your wider lenses. What lenses do you pack away when you go, and what protective gear do you bring because of the water? It's obviously a foul, difficult condition to shoot in. What do you bring in the way of gear and protection?
Yeah, so I primarily try to, I think my style is more up close and personal. Usually, sometimes getting run over by boats is what I do. So yeah, I rely a lot on wide angle. Probably my most used lens is a 14 to 24. And preparing for a sailing shoot, whether it's on a boat like this behind me, or as you see in there, there's pictures where they're coming over me. Either way, I'm using a water housing. So just preparing for that, making sure you have everything that you need to make sure it doesn't fog up, all the tools just in case it's not working. Electrical tape is my best friend. Toolkits are just important to have. Things to keep the water off the water housing. Sometimes fresh water, sometimes licking. It just depends on what you need for the lens.
Right.
It just takes experience to understand what happens in those situations so that you can troubleshoot and that it doesn't get in the way of making the pictures that you need when you need to make them.
Are there times in racing where you don't come back to land and you multiple days out on the ocean or the water? What do you do with gear in the way of batteries and charging and things like that? How do you bring 50 batteries, or do you have opportunities to recharge and offload images?
I think the Volvo Ocean Race is the biggest example of that, where we're at sea maybe 10 to 20 days at a time. And we do have charging capabilities on the boat, but you have to be really aware of that because it burns gas every time you need to charge batteries on the boat. So you are a little bit more, you're documenting the story, but you have to be a little bit more particular in how you use those things and understand that you can't replace anything. You got to bring enough. You got to keep it light, but you got to bring enough to get the job done. And that can be a little difficult. You have salt water does tremendous damage to your gear. You have to take care of it, make sure you're taking care of it all the time.
That's very important, I would think.
Alcohol wipes, all those things. Just making sure that it's stored properly. You can also be careful because you don't want to start a fire on the boat, because if that happens,
yeah, that would be a tough one.
In trouble. So there's a lot of little things to think about when you're out there. Just knowing that you have nowhere else to go to get replacements. You have to put probably a couple weeks of preparation into making sure you're set to go and have what you need.
Is there any part of the ocean where if I dove down to the bottom, would I find a piece of your gear? Did you ever lose anything in the ocean?
Most likely, yeah.
Rod Marr, talk to me about sports photography and football and the types of lenses you use and how you cover a game. What do you carry around when you're shooting a game?
On a typical game day, I primarily use a 600 millimeter f4. I complement that with the 180 millimeter to 400. But I also use wide lenses all the way down to, we'll use fisheye sometimes for an introductory remote shot, 14 to 24. So it's really cool. At the end of the day, we can look back and we viewed 6 or 7 different lenses, focal lengths from 16 millimeters all the way to 600, plus extenders. So lots of it.
On a daily game, though, like I would say most of the press that comes to cover, they're going to cover the game itself, maybe a little pregame at the end. Your day starts much earlier. What do you do to make these types of... Talk a little bit about the Seahawks culture and the way they think about photography, because not every teams think the same way, the importance of photography, and what you're documenting the hours before the game.
Well, my experience documenting this team has been amazing in that they are very open into sharing with our fans what the team is doing all the time. And so I kind of have the trust of them that I'm going to show our fans what we're doing, and yet I also have the trust of I'm not going to do anything or take a picture that's going to embarrass or otherwise cast a negative light on the team.
Make them look good.
Right, and that, that's my job. There's a bit of PR to it, but it also it's very organic. It's very genuine. There's nothing set up. There's nothing arranged in any of my photos. I'm merely capturing moments.
And when the team is on the road, do you go with them?
I do travel with the team, and so I'm able to photograph them in and off of buses and the charter aircraft, meetings, walkthroughs in hotel ballrooms, kind of all of it. And with the rise of social media, that's become very important for us. Instead of just when you and I were growing up, because we're both going in our 70s now right now. Football was on Sunday. It was barely even on Monday. Now Sunday, it's Monday, it's Thursday. But because of social media, and you got to feed all those channels, Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and it needs to be immediate. So we work all the time about generating new content.
Right. So Andrew, talk a little about, you're not always working with pro sports teams. You do a lot of college work as well. Right. Is the access for the college a little bit easier and access to the athletes a little easier? And again, if you don't know it, you got to look at Andrew's work, look at all their work, but he's probably one of the most versatile photographers out there, and being able to shoot the classic creative commercial portrait. And you'll see he's got a beautiful picture of this basketball player hanging up that he shot with the Z7. And then, like you said, do remote photography. Right. And what about the access in college world and pros, and which would you rather shoot?
The college guys are fun because, like you were talking about with social media, that's been their life. That's what they've grown up with. And so they're all about that. And so they know the value in that, and they love the exposure, and they love the pictures. A lot of the old guard you'll find with some of the professional players that are more standoffish. They're not all about it because they didn't come through college when social media was a thing, and so they're more standoffish. They don't have as much interest. But the younger guys, they're all about it. So there's college guys that I've been working with for a few years now that are about to go into the NFL Combine and into the draft. And so I'm going to go to Arizona and California later this month and work with them as they're doing their draft prep and just telling the stories for them that they can then turn around and use on social media and whatnot. But a lot of it just kind of depends team by team. In 2016, when I was fortunate enough to follow the Chicago Cubs on their run for the World Series, the team gave me virtually, zero access, anything more than what a normal member of the media would get. And a lot of it, again, goes back to developing relationships and building them. And so I'd make it a point to be the first one there for every game and one of the last ones to leave, so the players would be comfortable and used to seeing me, and I would be a familiar face. And then one day, David Ross comes out, and he was the personal catcher for John Lester, and he's throwing catch with his kids in an empty Wrigley Field. And I've got 2 little girls, and so I'm on the road a bit, and so I was like, I don't have a lot of pictures with me and them interacting. I've got pictures I've taken of them, but not a lot of interaction pictures. Right. So as a dad, I was like, all right, that's really cool. And I said, Mr. Ross, would you like me to take your picture? He's like, man, would you do that? He's like, I don't have anything like that. I'm like, of course, I'd be happy to. Took some pictures, emailed them to him that night. After that, before every single game, he would come out of the dugout, and if he did not come out to shake my hand, he would look for me until we made eye contact and tip his hat every single game. And then whenever it came time for the World Series, and I'm taking some pictures with him and his family celebrating winning the NLCS, knowing that this was his last year. Everybody knew that this was his victory lap. And I said, David, I want to follow you before your last start. And he said, you can have whatever you want. And so I followed him from the time he got up on Game 5 of the World Series, and his wife was really sick with a stomach bug, and they've got a doctor coming over to give her IVs, and he's chasing around the kids, and he's changing diapers and all that stuff while they're watching recap of college football from the previous day and getting ready to go play Game 5 of the World Series at Wrigley Field. So, I mean,
they have lives, really.
They do.
It's amazing, too, because sometimes we think these athletes on TV, you hear a lot of disparaging comments made when they're not playing well.
Right.
That connection, that's lost between TV and actually being there, it humanizes the game,
Absolutely,
doesn't it?
And there's a lot of people that don't get to see that. And for me, that's almost more interesting oftentimes than the games themselves.
Right.
Because I want to show who these people are who these players are as people. And, I love doing the training stuff because, they just see, what happens when the TV's on. They don't see what happens when these guys are struggling in the weight room and they're just working themselves to exhaustion and stuff like that. They don't see, the grind during the off season, which for me is fascinating.
Just to jump on what Andy said, I think those moments that happen, when they happen, you don't look at them as opportunities. You look at them just human to human, and it's like, wow, that would be a cool picture for this athlete to have. And just being aware of the fact that it's a good picture, and then being smart enough and being a good photographer and good business person to say, I'm going to share them with the person. And it was never your intent initially, but that is how those relationships get built. Not intentionally, but just treating these athletes like regular people. And they in turn then treat you like a really talented photographer instead of maybe just a media guy.
Yeah, and mutual respect grows at that point.
Mutual respect has got to be important.
But for me, photography is a gift. I'm blessed to be able to do what I do, and it's fun to make a unique picture, make a picture someone hasn't seen, and getting to share it. That's the joy in this, is getting to share it.
I think you hit on a really important point, and we may come back to this as well too, but you got to be creative. You got to be different than everybody else that's out there. But Jen, talk to me a little bit. You're photographing LeBron James or USA basketball or the women's basketball team, and you have these groups come in, you have to photograph them individually, and you have to photograph them as a group. Take us through what it's like to do a team photo at one of these events, and open up about maybe it's not so happy and easy with some of the athletes, that they're not so easy. I've been a part of the Mets team photo now for the last 10 years or so. Mark Levine, the Mets team photographer, puts it all together. But these guys are not the most patient people in the world, and he stresses because he may have 5 minutes once they come out there, so the preparation is far more. But what's it like to engage with them? And don't hold back if there's any athletes that are pains in the ass to work with.
They're all perfect angels.
Yeah,
men and women. One of my favorite stories is one of the first opportunities I had to shoot a team photo was Olympic basketball team on a boat in front of the Statue of Liberty. And we go out on the boat with the Olympic basketball players, and we're out on this boat for seemingly an hour and a half, 2 hours, and Jason Kidd comes over and he says, Jen, you're going to be fast with the team photo, right? I said, Jason, we're stuck out on a boat. Why does it matter how fast the team photo is? And he was like, well, you're usually fast, so you should be fast for this one too. And kidding aside, it's kind of nice to be known for being respectful of the athlete's time. The women's Olympic team photo, it's all about preparation, whether it's an Olympic basketball team photo or a portrait in back of house somewhere. It's, Joey Terrell said it earlier, it's having everything planned out in advance. You'd rather that hour before anyone gets there to do your prep and your testing than you would an extra 5 minutes. It's a lot of managing egos, but I think, again, on that Olympic basketball shoot, I went around and I introduced myself to pretty much every person on the boat, some of whom I knew. Hey, here's what's going to happen. And automatically, their guard is down just a little bit because you're treating them like a regular person, and you're giving them the courtesy of telling them what's in store.
That's so important too, and to me, it's not even just the players. A lot of time at venues, especially in rock and roll, but the sports venues, I always try to shake the hands of security, because security not only will have your back, but they're the people that are going to open the doors for you when you need them open. And I think I have been around a few photographers that have maybe quite a bit of ego, and these people are just trying to make a living just like you, but they just happen to be security. Rod, talk about how do you associate with the people in that stadium that you see every day?
Well, I think that starts, like, I work in a culture where even our head coach and our general manager say hi to everybody, and that includes the people that are opening doors, the people that you're talking about. I was just in Dallas, and when I walked into the locker room, the security guard at the visitors' locker room in Dallas said hi to me, remembered me from last year. We were there during the holidays. We chatted for a second. So those were little relationships are important, and they're not just important because of access. They're important because they're people too. Like, they're a human being, they're working, I'm a human being, I'm working. Let's have that professional relationship. No one on the team that I photograph treats anybody any less than anybody else. And that includes the kids who pick up the laundry and the socks and the jocks and the towels in the locker room. Everybody is there and everybody's part of a team. So I work in a culture that that creates that and believes that. And like I said, it's not just the job and who you are. It's like, I'm a person, you're a person, you're a person. You know, let's work on that level.
So Jen, you work in a very, again, unique environment. Talk about your relationship with the crew and how you're working in close quarters and overnight, and it's got to be a crazy environment and a somewhat dangerous environment. So talk about the relationship you have with the crews when you do go out, you know, on the water of these races, and then, you know, what it's like to be in that environment.
Well, I think for all of us, relationships are, you're going to hear that word thrown around a lot, no matter if it's the athletes we're working with or other people like you were talking about, and just being kind and respectful. Understanding these guys are allowing you into their lives to document their lives, and they're trusting you. In my particular field, whether I'm on the boat, we'll go on the boat, we're basically in charge of each other's livelihood or lives, especially on boats.
There's a safety factor.
Yeah, when we're offshore, we're taking care of each other, we're in charge of each other. So there's this respect that you need to build with each other, understanding they're trying to do their job. And once you build that up, then they allow you essentially to be a fly on the wall, which is what you really need to be able to document their story. I need to know where to be so that I'm not in their way, which is key. Just spending time with them, asking questions, understanding those things, where the danger spots are on the boats so that I'm not in the way, understanding the sport so that I can anticipate before and get the shots is also key. On those boats, they're carbon fiber. They're extremely loud when you're down below. You start to understand the sounds and what they mean, so you can tell when something's wrong, so you're ready to go. You got to be ready to go all the time.
Right.
And in an instance where I'm letting athletes sail over the top of me or near me, you got to have 100% faith in those guys and their athletic ability, that they're not going to hit you when you're asking them. You know, there's this tremendous trust there with them that they're not going to hit you. And they have to be comfortable with it as well. If they're not comfortable with it, I won't do it.
Speaking of the dangers, you had recently posted a picture of you not looking so good. What happened?
A year ago on Christmas Day, I was embedded as an onboard reporter for the Volvo Ocean Race. I was sailing on board a boat called Matt Frey. We were sailing leg 3 of the Volvo Ocean Race in the Southern Ocean, one of the most dangerous legs of the race from Cape Town to Melbourne. It was just a rough day, and daily tasks on board are difficult. I liken it to the movie Zootopia, where you see the sloths and how slow they have to move. That's sort of how you have to think about moving around the boat. Adding a camera to that can change things. I was helping the crew down below just change a food bag out for the day, so my hands were up like this, and one of the other crew members was cutting it, and right at that time, our boat went and bowed down into a wave. We all flew forward, and I went head first into the bulkhead. So,
you're out on the water. What do you do?
Luckily, it wasn't serious enough that I needed to be taken off the boat. It was too rough to put stitches in, so they glued my head, shaved my head a little bit, glued it together. We had to ask the skipper to slow down the boat for a minute so we could get the glue in the right spot. I looked like I had been in Fight Club. I was tremendously lucky. The impact could have broken my neck. The only repercussion of it is nerve damage around my right eye. Otherwise, I'm extremely lucky. It can happen in an instant, though. It happens so fast. So
we have about 10 to 11 minutes left. I want to shift gears towards social media. You talked a little bit about social media and the importance. I'm asking this openly. Feel free to jump in. Anybody? How active are you on social? How important is it to your business? And what is your social platform? We got Facebook, you got Twitter, you got Instagram. Where do you start off? Any of you? Jen, do you want to start? Oh, wait. Jen on the far end, Jen.
To be honest, I am not that active on social media, and it's something that I need to work on. My clients that I have are very loyal and great to me and don't feel the need to try out the latest and greatest, so I feel secure in those relationships. But I realize that it is just downright silly of me to not take advantage of all that social media has to offer. So it's an opportunity, shall we say, for me to do better, because I should.
But I'm guessing you would also, if you're not spending a lot of time on Instagram, you have a website and you send your clients to the website for work.
I have all of the platforms. It's just I could be using them better to tell the story of what I do. And I sort of take for granted, like, why would anyone really care about what we do? But we do a lot of pretty cool stuff, and it's neat for other photographers. It's neat for sports fans to see that access that we get.
Andrew, what about you? How often are you on social?
Fairly often. I certainly check it often. For me, it's not so much of a tool to necessarily grow business as it is to interact with fans of teams that may like a potential picture, but it's also an opportunity to share pictures that an editor might not select. And so if you're doing something for the magazine and there's only going to be a number of stories that appear, but we also have images that we're attached to, and so it's fun to then be able to gives us another platform to share our work and tell some stories behind what happened with a particular picture and stuff like that. Instagram is where I'm certainly the most active. Facebook and Twitter not near as much, but I get a lot more engagement there. But also it's something that I'm intent on growing significantly, moving forward.
So you brought up editors, right? Sometimes you're going to be really disappointed, Rod, if you have somebody else not agreeing with the type of picture you take being the better picture, and maybe they cut off a head or a leg or whatever, and maybe hopefully your editors are better than that.
I'm not going to speak, well, I'm going to speak for Andrew. I think it's more of a challenge for someone like Andrew who's working in an editorial climate.
Right.
I don't have issues with the people who choose my photos. They do a great job of choosing photos, but understand I have the first edit. So I'm sending them, they're not looking at 3,500 pictures and choosing one. They're looking at 50 and choosing one. And my social media channel is Instagram for the most part. It's the most visual channel for me. But also I'm in a unique spot in that my photographs are going to an outlet that has 2.3 million followers on Instagram.
The Seahawks.
Yeah, they've got multi-millions people looking at these photos. So my Instagram isn't going to compete with that. I don't want it to. If a photo goes there, I might choose a different frame, but I've also pivoted my own Instagram into more of a teaching tool. So if I have a photograph and people have seen it, I want to explain to them a little bit more about what I was thinking when I took it. And I get a lot of feedback from photographers who just see the settings, the lens choice. Oh, you did it this way. Or if there's interesting light, this is kind of what I was, so in my captions, I'm trying to do that. And I'll always have the metadata. I'll let you know what camera I shot it with, what lens, shutter speed, aperture, ISO, all of it.
Education becomes important at that point, right?
Yeah, it's a great way for me to engage. I get much more engagement when I'm helping people understand how I did it, because I want everyone to understand how I did it so they can do it themselves.
And I understand also that you have a great connection and relationship on Instagram with the recording artist Drake, right? You're Drake's best friend. He follows you on Instagram?
Andrew's going to the Drake concert tomorrow. I am not going to the Drake concert tomorrow. But yes, Drake currently follows me on Instagram, and I'm sure once he sees this or one of his people see this, I will be quickly unfollowed. Drake came to one of our practices, and he couldn't have been nicer, and we chatted, and he asked about, do you have an Instagram? And I told him, and he didn't write it down or anything. And then that night I had my daughter texted me, and she said, you're getting 3,000 Instagram followers about every 10 minutes, and I couldn't figure it out, and that's why.
That helps. I mean, that's a good boost.
Right, it's a great boost. But from there, then it's incumbent on me to keep it interesting, you know. And so not only are there sports fans, there's football fans, but there's fans of photography, like everyone seated here and watching on the live stream.
Yeah, I want to mention at this time, too, if you missed it before, Rod did a great sports program prior to this, and all the panelists are going to have their own individual programs coming up. And actually, in 5 minutes, we're going to make a transition where we push these chairs away, and Andrew's going to pick it up and really delve into the work he does. In this spinning reel of images behind us, I don't know if you've seen these great pictures of a pitcher blended into artwork. Andrew is unbelievable in the creative and using the technology, and I assume you're going to talk about that in your 30-minute talk?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. No, I can't wait.
I love you so much. You just make it
Usual.
so Jen.
Yeah.
Edney. You're on a boat. You're on a boat for 10 days in a row.
Yeah.
Computer, laptop, are you moving pictures from there? Do you have satellite transmission? I mean, is it important that you get pictures out, or is that not something you do until you get back to the land?
The Volvo Ocean Race was a bit different because that was the goal. Sailing is probably the least offshore sailing is the least spectator-friendly sport, which is why we were embedded on the boats to bring the story to the viewers. So we were only allowed to send off a few images, 10 images a day and maybe 3 minutes of video, just depending on what happened during the day. Because as you can imagine, it's quite expensive. Inmarsat was a huge sponsor for the race, and it allowed us to be able to do that. And it was pretty incredible to understand that the amount of technology it took just to send stuff off the boat.
I'm in city areas sometimes. I mean, especially in my hotel room around here, I lose my signal. You got no signal. How are you sending those images back? Are you moving the boat to a better transmission spot, or do you have more technology on the boats?
Sometimes it would be blocked. You'd get on it. We had to have training in understanding the satellite system. So if there was a problem, it just kind of depended on the day. But sometimes the way that the boat was in direction to the satellite, maybe the sail would be blocking it. So sometimes you had to do a little bit of troubleshooting.
Right.
But it allowed us to send technology off the boat in the middle of the Southern Ocean, which was pretty cool.
And do you do any other sports beyond the yachts? Is that primarily what you do?
I'm doing a bit of a shift from water sports. I'll still be doing water sports, but getting more into mountain and other projects coming this next year.
So, Rob, what were you going to say?
Conversely, she's going to move those photos off a boat. In my job, we're starting at 8 in the morning before a 1 o'clock game, and we're moving pictures all the time, steadily throughout the day.
Because your fans want to see what's going on.
Yes, right? And we will do that until 3 hours after the game. And it's just a steady stream of photos moving. So our editors have to be very quick. Our social team has to be very agile. And then also it depends what message are you sending out. Did we win? Did we not win? We wind down. I want to sort of separate the daily game, the typical game, the routine, with all of a sudden you're either at the World Series or you're at the Super Bowl. One might say it's just another game, but we know it's not another game. I remember when the Mets, which was a miracle to make it to the World Series in 2015, when you shoot the games during the season, you kind of are a little more relaxed. Almost every pitch and every moment counts. Andrew, talk about, you covered the World Series and the Astros when they won the championship, and Chicago. How important is every pitch, and you have to be on?
It's important, but I would say it's not near as important as something else, which is what I'm looking for in that situation, which is the reaction. So the plays are certainly important, but it's that reaction, that jubilation, the dejection, all that goes into telling a story. For me, nothing has been as crazy as Game 7 of the World Series when the Cubs ended 108 years worth of a drought.
That's a big story.
Yeah,
right?
And so just the way that the game went back and forth was, caused serious anxiety for me, because I'd also spent months telling the story. And I'm like, all right, the Cubs going to win, or are they not? Cleveland comes back, and watching out for little nuances, because, Aroldis Chapman, for the closer, he'd been brought out both games prior, and I was curious what was going to happen. He comes out, first fastball he throws, Jose Lindor puts it 3 decks up down the left field line.
Big home run.
He was waiting for the fastball. At that point, I look at David Ross, who was catching, and he looks over at Joe Madden, and he sees him shake his head, and he just mouths it. He doesn't have it. And at that point, you knew. And so Aroldis tries to keep feeding him slider, 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 foul, foul, foul. And he's just sitting and waiting for a fastball. Next fastball, boom, puts it off the camera in the outfield. And, you know, just then the reaction of everything, Aroldis just like shell-shocked, Lindor celebrating, going around the stands, and then, you know, the rain delay, and then the Cubs come out, and then I just remember, you know, Zobrist, whenever he hits the double to knock in Rizzo, I'm shooting Rizzo coming in, he just goes nuts as he crosses the finish line. I look over at Rizzo, I look over at Zobrist on second, and he's pointing up at the sky. I mean, that's what you're looking for. The plays are important, but for me, when it comes like a Game 7, a Super Bowl, it's the reaction.
And that is the guy. I know that feeling. It's like you see it happening, you know you got it, and that's great. Would you consider like dejection or a negative, like being the last play and you throw an interception on the 1-yard line in a Super Bowl? Rod, what does that feel like?
Wow.
I mean,
You
well,
know, the
listen.
year before that, we won the
You
Super
won the Super Bowl, I know. But
Like
honestly,
43
you have to deal with that, right? I mean, you know, your
Right.
team is about to win the Super Bowl, but it doesn't in that
But
quick
here's
transition.
the thing. Let me go back to 2005
All right,
when the Seahawks played in a Super Bowl, right? And it was a big deal. It was their first Super Bowl. I was terrible. My pictures were horrible. I sucked. I let the moment get too big. Okay, I let the moment get too big in my head, and I choked for. And
It
I
happens.
look back, and maybe there weren't a lot of great pictures in that game. Fast forward to the Denver Super Bowl, and I heard a coach tell his players, a position coach tell his players, it's the same game as we played last week. It's the same game as we played in the preseason in August. Just treat it the same. Don't give 110%. Give 100%. Do what you do. It was the biggest lesson for me. Since then, games don't get too big for me. It doesn't matter if it comes down to the last play and we lose. I got the pictures from that game because I wasn't thinking about, are we going to win? Are we going to lose? You talk
It was
about
about the moments.
anticipation. Right. For me, the anticipation doesn't work. I want to have anticipatory knowledge of what could happen. But then for me, personally, it has to be like jazz. I have to be in the moment. If you're a jazz musician, you have to be in the moment. You know the chords, you feel the rhythm, and then you just go. For me, that's what works. And that has helped me be more successful in that I don't get wound up in those moments anymore. I'm just like, time, score, situation, and then be open, because you don't know. It could be a touchdown. It could be an interception. It could be anything.
And that's great. So now, thank you guys so far. Andrew, we're going to shift these chairs out. Ladies, thank you for your insight in the worlds of your sports photography. Jen, again, I don't know how you do, Edney, what you do and go out as long as you do, but having to deal with the situations you do, Ms. Pottheiser and Rod, pretty amazing. So thank you for your time and insight. Let's shift these chairs over. We're going to go roll right into Andrew. Backstage, if we could set up Andrew's program, let's keep this going.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.